Well, my friends, suffice it to say, we live in interesting times. Now, as I write this, the United States is engaged in shooting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and fighting an unspoken one against Iran. At home, we have record levels of debt, a Congress long out of touch with the desires and demands of their constituents, and an attempt to socialize large areas of the American economy. So it often seems that we as a people are hanging by our fingernails on the edge of a very deep cliff. Well, all of that is true, of course, but I want to take a moment to try to put some of this into perspective, not to look for the lessons in history, but rather to step back, way back, and get some sense of just how far we've come. As an exercise in perspective, let's briefly compare our civilization to another. Let's compare our supposedly soulless, banal, humdrum society to the splendors of ancient Egypt. And let's not compare the Great Pyramid to one of our skyscrapers or airports or hospitals or even our shopping malls. Let's take a moment to compare one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Great Pyramid of Cheops, with the most common and drab and ordinary structure on the modern American block, the Great Pyramid versus the 7-Eleven. Assume for a moment that we could transplant a corner 7-Eleven into the Egyptian desert at the time of Cheops. It's a tiny speck compared to the gleaming white marble sides of the pyramid. It looks small and poorly made, at least from afar. Pharaoh arrives by barge and litter to inspect the competition. He and his princes and a retinue of servants approach the plain, unadorned metal doors and step inside. By the gods! It's cool inside. It's as cool as the desert night here in the middle of the relentless day. Outside, servants sweat and minor officials fan themselves, but Pharaoh is, perhaps for the first time in his life, comfortable in the middle of the desert sun. As he turns to exclaim this wonder to his underlings, "By the ghost of Osiris, the walls! You can see right through them." Glass was unknown to the ancient Egyptians. Pharaoh commands endless lines of bucket-laden servants to throw water upon this transparent wall, flinching and then laughing endlessly with his children as the water stops in midair and slides to the ground. Its cost? No, it's not the cost of a year's harvest for the entire nation. It's a trifle. It's a nuisance, should we need to replace it. So after about an hour of amazement, Pharaoh reluctantly moves on to the magazine rack. Glancing at one, he recoils in horror, making a sign of protection against evil. There, like a tiny row of jail cells, sits face after face of imprisoned souls, bound into small rectangles. What else can they be? We've all seen Egyptian hieroglyphics. They're entrancing, but photorealistic they are not. How many monuments, how many man-years of back-breaking labor, how many deaths could have been averted for a man obsessed with being remembered if only Pharaoh had been able to be photographed, immortalized, captured with a precision and nuance greater than that of all of his artisans working together for 1,000 years. And over there on the rack beside the magazines, newspapers. Pictures and text detailing the most significant events across the entire globe, covering an area that makes the Egyptian empire look puny and insignificant. How do you explain to a king who must wait weeks or months or even years for critical information that each bundle of paper contains news no later than a day old from every remote corner of the earth and sells for about 1/10 of what our most poorly paid laborer makes in a single hour? Now Pharaoh begins to think that we are mocking him. Yet there is much more to vex and amaze this great king. Ice. Likely Pharaoh has never seen ice, let alone touched it. At first he recoils, thinking he's been burned. You grab a handful and gesture for him to put a cube in his mouth. But Pharaoh grows enraged. You are trying to kill him. So you suck on an ice cube to show him that it's safe. Tentatively, he tries for the first time in his life something cold. A diamond that turns into perfectly pure water in his hand. You know, the most powerful man in the world has never tasted water as pure as in any ice cube at the 7-Eleven. As Pharaoh walks down the aisles, trying out food that we take for granted, but which he, the richest man in the world, has never experienced, he hesitates, and with each can and bag and box of food he opens, you will have to reassure him time and time again that even though you have no idea where the food was made or when or by whom, you know it to be absolutely safe to eat. Cornflakes and potato chips, how many lives would a bag of Ruffles be worth to this man, who's never seen, let alone tasted, a potato? How many men would Pharaoh send to die to obtain another box of Oreo cookies for his sons? An entire army? A fleet? Now, the princes have been exploring every nook and cranny, reporting back to their father. In back, water which flows endlessly, purer than any they have ever tasted, and some of it is hot. There's a giant white bowl that all can drink from, father. Behind the counter, scores of small, beautifully colored little cylinders which make fire. And made of what? It's not wood or metal, something smooth and hard and perfect. But Pharaoh hardly notices. He's staring up at a box mounted in the corner of the wall, and there, for the first time in his magnificent life, Pharaoh can see Pharaoh. Cheops raises his arm, and the small Shwabdi Cheops raises his arm. Pharaoh advances, making a face. The imprisoned Pharaoh does the same. And there, in one of the four corners of the enchanted box, the crown prince. He's not in the room, and yet Pharaoh sees him plainly. When his son emerges from the storeroom, Pharaoh hugs him as if he's returned from the dead. Yes, King, we can, on such boxes, see an event of any significance around the entire world as it happens. And we can see singers and minstrels and performers, not only those who are alive today, but those who may have died many years ago, preserved forever in language and in form. Now over there, another magic tablet that communicates back to you, and upon following a set of instructions that you give it, dispenses money. Money flows from it at your command, a seemingly bottomless pot of gold, although it must be said, the only flash of disappointment Pharaoh has shown was for the quality of the money. Gold coins would have made a much better impression. We probably should have taken him to Vegas, but Vegas probably would have killed him. Outside, the sun is setting now, and yet the magic of the place grows ever stronger because the light does not fade. Having read by candlelight his entire life, the idea of day during night is powerful magic indeed. The princes have fallen silent. They have discovered the Slurpee machine and mortgaged their birthrights, entire kingdoms, to the clerk for another refill. And here, at the center of the counter, a machine that will do complex mathematical calculations flawlessly, instantly. There sits a machine that can do in 5 seconds what it would take an entire court of astronomers and scribes 5 years to calculate. The eyes of the underlings, the Egyptian bureaucrats who must count and account for everything in the kingdom by hand, begin to glaze over what they could do in a single day with such a wonder. But Pharaoh is no longer happy, you see. Like many of that time and place, he suffers from terrible toothaches. There's so much sand in the environment that even the grinding of flour produces bread that erodes away the tooth enamel. Pain is a constant companion for him, and like many of his age, like many of every age before our own, he suffers in silence. That's just his life. This, the most powerful man on the planet, suffers just the same as the poorest. But here, in this bland, ubiquitous convenience store, there is mercy for rich and poor alike. Cold medicine, medicines to reduce fever, and medicine for pain. In 15 minutes, this great Pharaoh will know a few moments free of pain. His children, whom he loves as we love our own, also free of pain. What would the most powerful man in the world give for a bottle of Excedrin? How much gold? How much land? How many lives? The pain subsides, and although perhaps not a good or a wise send-off for a man with a toothache, the transcendental look of joy on Pharaoh's face when he first encounters a Coke and a Snickers bar is a sight that his children will never forget. Even after he is long dead, they will always remember him thus as they ride towards the river on the dark night of the new moon, the little palace from the future, glowing in the dark like a beacon visible for 50 miles and more. Now that's the most humble structure of our age. Now, on the other hand, the Great Pyramid of Cheops is a massive, beautifully decorated, and cunningly designed pile of stones. You know, if you go to Cairo today and stand in the shadow of the pyramids, you would be amazed at how similar life is today to that of the lives of the people at the time of the pyramids. The obvious changes, electricity, automobiles, cell phones, essentially come to them like the 7-Eleven of our example, from the future. From a people whose freedom, ingenuity, inventiveness, and creativity have been a reactor of innovation that has lit the world. Now, many of those essential elements are under attack today, which is why we must fight back. Americans are from the future, and we have to make sure it stays that way. My friends, we're in some serious trouble, but we'll get through these troubles, and we've gotten through the far bigger ones we've had to face and overcome to live in this age of miracles and wonder.